This is Pastor Don and Donna Long, and we're delighted that you chose to join us in this Grafted In broadcast for this week, as we are going to have a discussion, Donna, about Hanukkah.
Yes, it is the season already.
Yeah, what a wonderful time of year it is.
Yes,
I think,
it is.
While most of our Christian friends are thinking of Christmas, here we are as a group of people who have understood that we've been grafted in to Israel. So we have begun to explore what Israel's holidays are like.
Yes.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 23, talks about the Moedim, the Moeds, the appointed festivals of God.
Yes.
And while Hanukkah is not one of those appointed ones, it does bring to mind the fact that God has appointed times with His people. And the Apostle Paul tells us in the book of Romans that we as Gentile believers have been grafted into Israel.
Yes.
Much in the way that I would expect, Donna, that people who would come as immigrants from other countries to our country would become experienced in and begin to celebrate our holidays. 4th of July, for example, would become a meaningful thing to them in their adopted country. So it is as believers, as we get grafted into God's people, then the holidays that are in the Scriptures are the ones that we want to go with, and not the ones that that we particularly have decided.
No.
So when we turn to the Scriptures, very interestingly, we don't find any evidence of Easter or Passover.
No, it's not mentioned in there at all.
In fact, Easter and Passover Easter and Christmas were not celebrated by the church for the first 200 years. Mm-hmm. So if you could come with us on a time machine and we could go back to Jerusalem or to Antioch or to the church of Ephesus in 100 AD and say to them, so what are you going to do for Christmas? They
wouldn't know what we were
They wouldn't
talking
have
about.
a clue as to what you're talking about.
No idea.
What is Christmas? In fact, the name didn't exist.
That's right.
If we said, so how are you going to celebrate Easter? Again, they wouldn't have had any idea at all. They would have been familiar with the pagan festivals, but the church itself had...
They would have been very familiar with the pagan festivals. They were surrounded by that.
That's right. On the other hand, if you got talking about, well, what do you celebrate as a church? They would have talked about tabernacles, about Yom Kippur, about Sukkot.
That's
They
right.
would have talked about
Pesach.
Passover. They would have talked about those holidays, and they would have talked about Hanukkah. So we want to review with you and share with you what Hanukkah is all about, how it gets started. But before that, Donna, let's address the question of whether or not Jesus, Yeshua, ever celebrated Hanukkah. Because, if you go on the web, there'll be those who say we shouldn't be celebrating Hanukkah, that it's not one of the Moeds of Leviticus. But my question is, so what did Yeshua do?
That's right.
And we find that in the Gospel of John. In what chapter was that?
It was 10:20.
22. Then came the Feast of Dedication at Jerusalem. So, Donna, what is this Feast of Dedication?
The Feast of Dedication was, as a matter of fact, it was the time when the temple was being rededicated and all that. And as a matter of fact, you're talking about on the web that you'll go on there and you'll have people saying you should or you shouldn't. And you'll also have them saying, some will say, well, Yeshua himself celebrated Hanukkah. And then you'll have others that say, no, he didn't. And I think you and I came across some interesting things about this. The Feast of Dedication was going on at the time in this passage when it talks about Yeshua being there in Jerusalem during the Feast of Dedication.
So that's what it says. When the time came, the Feast of Dedication at Jerusalem, and that Feast of Dedication is
Hanukkah.
That is
But
Hanukkah.
see, people, in some translations it will say that. It will say Hanukkah. Okay, but a lot of them, they say the Feast of Dedication. I think most Christians whiz right by that. They whiz right by that. Well, that was just something that was going on in Jerusalem at the time, and they miss the fact that that is one and the same as Hanukkah.
So when it says, then came the Feast of Dedication at Jerusalem, it was winter. That gives us a clue because Hanukkah is always the 25th
of Kislev.
And that's not the same as the 25th of December.
No, it is not.
The Hebrew months don't line up with the Gregorian calendar.
That's right.
The Hebrew months are on a lunar calendar. Sometimes they come earlier and later. This year, Hanukkah begins in our calendar, our Gregorian calendar, on the 9th of December.
Yes.
There are some years when it occurs way, late in December.
That's
and then
right.
I believe next year
It starts on Thanksgiving.
It starts on Thanksgiving.
But that's the way the Hebrew calendar goes,
Right. So for the Jew, it's always the 25th of Kislev.
It's always no matter where it falls on the Gregorian calendar, it's
Right.
always the 25th of Kislev.
So this year it's 8 days, beginning the 9th of December. In fact, if you want to join us, we have a service the evening before. On the 8th of December, we have our Erev Hanukkah, our evening of Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah, a celebration here at the church.
That's right.
But
And then we celebrate on Sunday at the Old Mill.
at the Old Mill, we have a great dinner together.
Great dinner together.
So but let's get back to Yeshua.
Yes.
So the question is, did he celebrate Hanukkah? And what we do is we look in John, and it says, then came Hanukkah at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Yeshua was in the temple area walking in Solomon's colonnade.
That's right.
And then he goes on and has a discussion. But before we get to maybe what he discussed, let's talk about Yeshua in Jerusalem.
That's right.
What is unusual to you about this passage?
The unusual thing is that he spent very little time really in Jerusalem, unless he was there for one of the feasts or something like that. He had a purpose, he had a special purpose for being there. And at this point, he would not have been there unless it was for some special thing, which we know what was going on. The Feast of Dedication was going on. And so it connects us in this passage to realize he was there, and he was there for a purpose. It was unusual for him to be there. He would have stayed up in the Galilee, where all his ministry was taking place and all that. But he was in Jerusalem at this time during the Feast of Dedication, and that's what he was there for.
So if we were to look, in fact, if you were to come with us on one of our trips to Israel, it would become very clear to you the bulk of Yeshua's ministry took place around the Sea of Galilee.
That's right.
And he would make these trips down to Jerusalem, and you had to walk.
That's right.
We can drive there in matter of a few hours, but if you walk, it's probably going to take you a couple of days to get to Jerusalem, and it's not an easy walk.
That's right.
And so the pilgrims, during the pilgrim festivals from Galilee, that was quite an effort to come down to the moeds, to the appointed things. We know that whenever Yeshua was in Jerusalem, it appears he didn't stay there at night.
No, he didn't.
He always went outside of Jerusalem to a town called Bethany. It was a home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And he spent the time in Bethany. So Yeshua was really not comfortable around the political, religious intrigues and the political things that were going on in Jerusalem. He was about preaching to the people.
Yes.
And so for him to be in Jerusalem, it had to be
for a special purpose.
For a purpose. So we find him there on the Moeds, the appointed festival. We find him there at Passover.
That's right.
And now in this passage in John, we find him there at Hanukkah. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is.
So when people say, well, it doesn't say he celebrated it, well, he's there. It would be like if...
well, again, you have to know the whole picture in order to be able to pick this out and realize that all that we've just discussed of the fact that he rarely was there. He only went there for specific purposes and all that. And if you look at the whole picture, it may not say he was there celebrating Hanukkah, but you can add that together if you know the whole picture, and you can discern that is what he was there for.
It would be like if somebody asked the question, does Donna Long celebrate the 4th of July? And someone were to say, well, I don't know, but I do know.
She was downtown Main Street on the 4th of July while the parade was going on.
Right. That would give you, or every 4th of July she went to Washington, D.C. You'd say, well, what was so special about then? You'd say, well, that's the holiday, so we have reason to believe that Donna Long celebrated the 4th of July because she went to Washington to be part of the festivities. So because Yeshua is in the temple, he's walking around the temple courtyard on the Feast of Dedication, then we know he celebrated it. Hanukkah.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about the background of Hanukkah, how it got started. Rome was in charge of that whole area. They had taken over the whole land of Israel. But before they did that, the Greeks were in charge. When we open the Bible and we start with Matthew, the Romans are in charge. When we finish in Malachi in the Old Testament, the Persians are in charge. Well, what happened in between there, those 400 years? And you can't find it in the Old Testament, New Testament. You have to go to the apocryphal books, the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, to read the history of how the Greeks under Alexander the Great had conquered the world. And when Alexander died, he divided the empire got divided among 3 of his generals. And Antiochus ended up in control of what we would call the Middle East of Israel. And Antiochus was all for assimilating everybody together. Let's all be Hellenized. Let's all look like Jews. Let's all, like Greeks. Let's all take on this new identity. And the Jews resisted that. And so he put in laws that you couldn't be reading the Torah, you couldn't have your children circumcised, you couldn't observe the Sabbath, in an attempt to eradicate Jewishness.
That's right.
And when the soldiers came to a little town to enforce that law, there was an elderly man, Mattathias, and he had several sons, and Mattathias and his sons took up arms and killed the soldiers that came and started a revolt. The head of the revolt, one of his sons, was Judas Maccabee. And Judas led the Maccabees into a rebellion against Rome, which succeeded for a period of time. It actually drove the Romans out. And when they came in and recaptured Jerusalem from the Romans, what they found out, from the Greeks, excuse me, but what they found out is the Greeks had desecrated the temple. They had slaughtered a pig on the altar.
Yes.
They had desecrated everything that was there. And so they had to cleanse and rededicate the temple. And it came to the time for the lighting of the menorah.
Yes.
Now the menorah is the candelabra that was in the holy place in the temple, and it had 7 branches to it. And it required a special oil. The oil had to go through this several-week process to be made, to be purified to the quality that you could use it. Interesting, the wicks of that candle, that menorah, were made from the discarded garments of the high priest.
That's right.
And so they'd make this oil, and they would, it's not candles as we think today.
No.
That's an anachronism to think of candles back there. They didn't have candles back then.
It was oil with the wicks.
You had an oil pot in which sat this wick, and that was the light of each of these 7 branches. But what they found out is when they cleaned the temple out, they only had a 1-day supply of the oil.
Of the oil, that's right.
1-day supply. And it was going to take them 8 days before they could get fresh oil made. Well, they lit the menorah of the candelabra. They lit that anyway. And it lasted for 8 days. That one day of oil lasted for 8 days.
See, they did what they could.
That's right.
Right? And he put his super on their natural.
They did their natural. I have 1 day's worth.
Might as well light it. We'll light it, and he touched it. And
absolutely. And that's why when if you have Jewish friends, they'll talk about Hanukkah as a time, and they use this phrase, a great miracle happened here. A great miracle happened here. And the miracle was that the 1 day's worth of oil lasted for
8 days.
8 days. So that became the focus of Hanukkah was around 2 things. It was around rededication.
Yes.
Rededicating the temple.
The temple and cleansing
and it was around the miracle of light.
Light.
The miracle of the light. So now,
the light in the temple was one of the most important things. It was the whole focal point of the temple.
Yes.
Was the lighting of the menorah.
Right.
That was way back in Leviticus. You find that was a very important part of it, and it was always supposed to be burning.
Right.
So, hallelujah.
So when you find the menorah with its 7 branches, but you come to Hanukkah,
yes,
and we now have
different.
9
I think it's called the Hanukkah.
Hanukkah would be the plural. The Hanukkah would be the plural of the candles that are in there. So, I have found even Jewish people who didn't know that. I mean, I've talked with people who grew up as nominal Jews, but they always celebrated Hanukkah, so they always had 9 candles.
That's right.
And when I said, well, what about the 7-branch one? And they said, we never even heard of it.
Never realized it, right.
The 7-branch candle
was the menorah in the temple.
The menorah in the temple. The Hanukkah is 9 candles, right. And one is called the shamash. It is the servant candle, and that one is used to light the other 8.
And it's always taller than the other.
The shamash is taller, and you use it to light the other 8 candles.
That's right.
And each night you light a different one. So there's the 9. One is the servant candle, and then there's the 8, and those 8 are for the 8 days of the miracle.
That's right. That's right.
So now let's talk about Yeshua then. So now you have a background to where Hanukkah came from. So Yeshua is there in the midst of this celebration.
Yes, he is.
We can't take today's like Christmas or even today's Hanukkah in America, which has become Christianized.
It's become Christian. Well, what it's done is they've unfortunately adopted much of the Christmas trappings.
Right.
And they've put them into Hanukkah.
So just like, a Christmas tree, where on earth does that come from? It's nothing that you'd find in the Bible. No. Well, now you have a Hanukkah tree.
You have some Jews.
So you have some Jews having a Hanukkah tree. Those are Jews who are simply trying to act like the culture,
right.
The Christian culture.
The giving, which really is the very thing that Mattathias had revolted against, was assimilation.
Think about it.
And way back when this whole revolt took place and they won, that was the biggest thing that they were trying to do. The Greeks were trying to get them to assimilate. And so they win, and here they are celebrating the very feast that's recognizing and remembering this, but yet all the trappings have come on Hanukkah that are assimilating. They're assimilated into the culture.
That is so.
Which is sad. It's very sad.
It's so ironic. I mean, the holiday is about we will not assimilate with our culture. We will be who we're called to be.
That's right. We're set apart.
That's the holiday.
That's right.
And now here we are hundreds of years later, and so many Jews today celebrate the holiday assimilating the Christian culture.
That's right.
I mean, that's tragic.
Sad.
But unfortunately, that seems to be human nature. But if we go back to the meaning of it, certainly Yeshua was not there assimilating.
No, he was not.
And therefore we can't say, well, Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah and take contemporary Hanukkah in its secular way and think that's what he was doing.
That's right.
They exchange gifts every night for all 8 nights. Again,
right, here in America,
that was not done back then, nor is it done, by the way, among Jews in Israel.
No,
they don't do that. That's an American custom. Again, American.
Now you find Americans who have made Aliyah over to Israel bring that with them in their little household. But by and large, that is not done.
And where, by the way, did the American Jews get that idea of giving gifts?
Out of Christmas.
Out of Christmas.
Out of Christmas. And because their children were with other children, they didn't want their children to feel bad because they're talking about Christmas and all the gifts and gift giving and all that. And again, I think it's a compromise. It's a major compromise because I think they've lost the whole essence of the spiritual side of Hanukkah, which is so vast and so deep.
And if we think about that, it's an epitome of what happens, that God lays out a plan for events, holidays, moeds, that are to be divine connections, to be things that call us to a deeper purpose.
That's right.
And it's like the devil comes in and he warps it with very fleshy things.
That's right.
Let's have Easter eggs, let's have Santa Claus, let's have, all the trappings of a secular society. So now you go to churches and you walk in a church that celebrates Christmas, for example, and there are churches you don't see a nativity scene around.
No, you see giant trees.
You see
Christmas trees in the front, in the sanctuary.
Right. Yeah. But no nativity scene, nothing about the birth of Jesus, but you see all the trappings. There are even churches that have Santa Claus. There are
out gifts and all that.
Christian artists who paint Santa Claus pictures to celebrate
Yep. Santa
Christmas.
Claus looking over the manger.
Yeah, you know,
all that
and so we have a whole generation of children and
that
grandchildren
have been brainwashed.
who have been robbed,
Their
literally.
minds have been transformed.
Right, toward the negative.
Towards the negative,
They've
that's
literally
right.
been robbed of the richness of the traditions of God.
That's right.
And, you know, we as adults will be held accountable to God for that.
Yes, we will.
So we can go back to the roots, however, and we can say Yeshua was celebrating Hanukkah.
Yes, he was.
He was at the temple. He was at the place of rededication.
Yes, he was.
He could have stayed in Galilee and celebrated it there, but he wanted to be in the temple itself because that's where the rededication had taken place.
Right.
So I think one of the key themes that we need to examine in Hanukkah as Christians who've been grafted into our Jewish roots
Yes.
is the theme of rededication.
Yes.
Rededication, cleansing and rededication.
That is the whole thrust of Hanukkah.
So now think, here we come. We started out in the early Christians celebrated Hanukkah.
That's right.
And then around 200-300 AD, you know, the powers that be, the Gentiles, began to drive out all Jewishness and adopt pagan festivals. Christmas is a pagan
Yes, it is.
festival. All the
All you have to
trappings-
do is go online and Google it in. You can,
Yes.
Anybody who really wants to know,
Yeah.
all you have to do is go online, on the internet, Google in Christmas and its or origins and all that. And if you really want to know, you'll find out it is a pagan holiday.
And look how far we've come now,
Same
where
thing with Easter.
people don't want to even in stores say Merry Christmas. They're going to
No,
say,
right.
you know, Happy Holidays. What? See, the devil comes in and he steals the very
That's right.
spiritual essence.
That's right.
First, he takes away Hanukkah, replaces it with a pagan festival, Christmas. Then he tries to take Christ out of Christmas.
He's going to. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So first of all, I'm not going to let you have rededication as part of it. We're going to have a birthday celebration of Jesus, and then we're going to then take Jesus out of it, and we're left with a Santa Claus from the
Santa
North
Claus,
Pole
that's
giving
right.
out gifts.
That's right.
And that's how the devil steals the whole message of the season.
And people going into debt way over their head. And then there's the higher depression and suicide and everything after, because, you know, all that gift giving and all that kind of stuff, it can't fill the empty hole.
Right.
It cannot, you know. And at the end of it all, when it's all over and all the hoopla is over, they're still alone and lost and in need of a Savior.
That's right. So think back. We can think back to days when we used to celebrate Christmas, and we had 9 children, so we certainly had a house full. And, you know, getting ready, I mean, you start right after Thanksgiving,
That's right.
you put your tree up, you put your decorations out. Every year you're buying more decorations, you're trying to hang lights outside, and then you go through, well, we got to buy toys for everybody, and you're trying to match, well, I want to make sure I spend the same amount of money
Every
on
child.
every child, because you don't want to favor one over the other. And every year the gifts get more and more expensive, or certainly as the children get older,
That's right.
the gifts get more and more expensive. And you know, and then there's this big buildup. Most moms and dads, if you have lots of children, you know, it's Christmas Eve, and you run off to church, and you sing whatever songs and hymns, and then you put the children to bed, and you're probably still wrapping presents.
That's right.
And you're wrapping presents to 2, 3 in the morning, and then, you know, 6 in the morning, the children are waking up 2 hours later saying it's Christmas.
Christmas,
And mom and dad are, you know, they're tired, they're wiped out, and the children rip through the packages. In today's world, so many of the children, you know, look at it, put it
aside,
aside,
and are
grab
looking
another
for the
one.
next one.
Children complain about what they got. That's not what I wanted. I mean, you know, the idea I'm giving you a gift.
And then the day after Christmas, everybody, or the couple of days after, they're all at the customer service thing trying to return gifts that they didn't want.
But even think of the attitude on Christmas. How many spoiled children there are.
That's right.
In other words, they've got 5 toys, but they didn't get the one they want. They've got a room full of toys, but they don't like this one. Sibling fighting with sibling.
It's all self-centered. It's all me, feeding the flesh.
Right. It's degenerated into a very self-centered, sick holiday. Why? Because we departed from God's
The Word.
Now, contrast that. Imagine that this is a season of rededication. A season where you're coming to the end of our calendar year is when it occurs. and you're reflecting upon the year where maybe things have been given to you, and reflecting on that, saying, you know, I might have gotten off track this year. I might have allowed the world to creep in.
That's right.
You know, last year I made some promises. I'm going to be more faithful to God. I'm going to read my Bible.
Read my word more.
But that didn't happen. And so now, imagine what would happen if families came into this time as a focusing on rededication. This is a time when I cleanse the temple.
That's right.
So within Christianity, by separating ourselves from our Jewish roots, what we did is we removed the idea of cleansing yourself to be fit for God and replaced it with a very self-centered, what do I get? Can I have more for me? Did I get what I want? And
the whole meaning is lost.
And the whole meaning is lost. So when we connect, however, with our Jewish roots, and when we go back to the scriptures, what happens is we start finding meaning.
That's right.
We find meaning and purpose in the fact that this is a time when really we take a stand. We will not be like the world.
That's right. We will not assimilate.
We will not assimilate.
We will not assimilate.
And so when people drive by our church and they say, well, gee, you know, do you have Christmas trees? Do you have all this stuff? Do you do that? No, we're not going to be like the world. Why would we want to be God's people and look just like the world?
God always set his people apart from the world. They were always distinguished from it. There was always a separation.
And he does. He says, come apart, be separate.
That's right. He says that.
And when
many times in the Word.
That's right. And so I think we would want to certainly challenge our listeners to begin to reflect upon the season. There is a gift. It is the gift of Yeshua.
Yes, it is.
But he was given so our lives would become right, so we could rededicate our lives to God.
That's right.
We'll talk next week about the fact that the message of the light, but the message of rededication is a message that this should be a time of year when we rededicate ourselves. We look around our house and we don't say, what new things can I get? No. But we look around our house and say, where is there evidence of the world creeping in my house?
That's right.
And we get rid of it. We cleanse it. We take out of our house, off our TV, things that have crept in that really do not belong in a house of God, a Christian house. And we cleanse our temples, both our homes, our personal lives, our businesses. We cleanse and we rededicate.
Yes. That's a good thought.
Amen.
That's a good
well,
thought.
This is Pastor Don and Pastor Donna Long. We're delighted that you chose to spend this time with us. Plan to join us next week at the same time when we continue our discussion about Hanukkah on Grafted In.